Okay.
Excuse me. Oh, you're fine.
Yeah, and just maybe back to you and tell them. Yeah.
I'm Tom Seabaugh. I don't know if we've been introduced yet, but I have cards if anybody wants the spelling of my name. I wasn't on the press release. Anybody else? There you go. One more. Can I have one, please? Yes, you may.
Okay. Thank you all for being here today. We're here today to announce the filing of a government claim against the City of Bakersfield on behalf of Tatiana Hargrove. Many of you know about the incident that took place on Father's Day of this year, where Tatiana was riding her bicycle to the Wooden Nickel to buy her dad a Father's Day gift. Unfortunately, the store was closed, and so she decided to ride her bike back home. And on her way home, she had stopped nearby the intersection of Ming and Ash to just get a drink of water. It was hot in Bakersfield that day. She had a Spider-Man backpack that was red and black in color. And when she was stopped to get a drink of water, from the corner of her eye or through the reflection on the watch that she was wearing, she saw some flashing lights and turned around and noticed that there were several law enforcement officers from the Bakersfield Police Department who were out of their patrol vehicles, and one officer, who we know later to be Officer Christopher Moore, had his firearm drawn and pointed at her and immediately told her to put her hands up and pointed his firearm at her. As you all can imagine, as someone who had done nothing wrong that day, who has never done anything wrong in her life, to be involved with law enforcement, she was freaked out. She was scared. She thought that she was going to be shot. And so the officer asked her if she had been at the grocery outlet on Ming Avenue. She told him that she had not. He asked her again if she was sure if she had been at the grocery outlet, and she said, yes, I was not there. And then another officer, Senior Officer Vasquez, who was also on scene, asked her for, he said, let me see what's in your backpack. And this was the only time, contrary to what other people have told you about this case, where she did not immediately provide him with the backpack. She instead said, do you have a warrant? Which was a perfectly reasonable question for her to ask, given the circumstances that she had done nothing wrong, and there was no reason for them to look for her backpack. The officer, in response to her, said, we don't need a warrant for your backpack, and then directed her attention to Officer Moore, who was an officer who was equipped with a canine in his vehicle. And she looked back and saw that the canine had been taken out of the vehicle, and she was now scared for her life that the canine was going to attack her, so she immediately handed her backpack out to give to Officer Vasquez. At that point, despite the fact that she was giving her backpack and had her hands up, Officer Vasquez grabbed her and pulled her towards him. And as he pulled her towards him, his foot came off the sidewalk and he fell back against a patrol vehicle, and she fell on top of him. At that point, he propped her up and he punched her in the face, and she was on the ground, and he got on top of her and he put his knees on her back. She was in pain. She felt like she couldn't breathe. She was scared for her life. And at this point, Officer Moore dispatched his canine onto her. The canine got a hold of her right leg and started to bite her for some period of time. She tried to get the dog off of her. The officers described that as her not being compliant, but I bet that if any one of us had a canine biting onto some part of our body, our natural instinct might be to try to get the dog off of us so that the dog wouldn't keep biting us. But in any event, the dog kept biting her, and the officer continued to apply pressure to the back of her. At some point then, the officers put her in handcuffs, and then they applied a hobble to her legs. So in essence, her arms and her legs were both tied together, and then they picked her up and they threw her in the back of a patrol vehicle. At that point was the first time they asked her what her name was, and she said Tatiana, and they said, well, that's a girl's name. And she said, yeah, I am a girl. I just dress like a guy sometimes. And you would think when they had information, the information according to Officer Moore that he had received prior to making the stop with Tatiana was a black male in a white t-shirt with a pink backpack. She did not have a pink backpack, and she's obviously not a male. Now, much has been made of this fact that, well, she looks like a male. I don't see it, and you would think that the officers would do more to ascertain that information before they start to use force, before they throw her on the ground, before they put a canine on her, not after the fact. But despite that, they then took her to Kern Medical, where she was treated for injuries to her right thigh. She also had some injuries to her wrist and her fingers. And after being at Kern Medical, they arrested her. And then took her down to Central Receiving and booked her there. And she remained there overnight until her very wonderful parents were able to make bail. And she was released that morning and was fearful that the district attorney was going to charge her. Then, as you all know, the district attorney's office made a decision in August where they said that they didn't think that they could persuade 12 people in this community that Tatiana had committed a crime, and so they decided that they were not going to file charges against her. The other important event in this case is that the chief, Lyle Martin, had called Tatiana's parents to apologize for what happened, but as it was reported in the media, he said that he apologized and they shouldn't have put the canine on her, but they also didn't feel like she handled the situation in the best possible way. The district attorney was maybe even more forceful in that respect when she said that she thought that Tatiana was defiant, not cooperating with the officers, and that if she had, complied with the officers' commands, it might not have gotten this far, but that the officers weren't perfect either. We're here to tell you today that we reject that. We don't think that's appropriate. We think that what happened to Tatiana is an injustice and it should have never happened. No one who was riding their bike on their way home and doing nothing wrong deserves this to have happened to them. And to be a victim and then to be told that you're going to be charged with a crime and then to be told, actually we're not going to pursue those charges, but pat us on the back because we've decided to do the right thing. We're not going to pursue the charges against her. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's right at all. I think they did the right thing by deciding not to charge her, but I think what they should really be taking a harder look at is there anyone else that should be charged for what happened on that day? And part of the reason that we are filing this claim and we will file this lawsuit in this case against the officers is because there has to be accountability for these types of things. And the district attorney's office is not going to prosecute these officers for what happened with Tatiana. So how is there going to be accountability? That's where we step in. That's where we say enough is enough. We were here not too long ago in the case of Xavier Hines and Timothy Grismore, when officers stopped them, assaulted Grismore, detained them overnight. And in that case, too, the district attorney came out and said that the officers had no right to stop them. It's starting to smell and look like a pattern. and we're concerned about that. Now, to his credit, I will say that the chief called and apologized to Tatiana's parents, and I think that he has said that we need to be better than this. And I appreciate those comments, and I know that Tatiana and her family do as well. But we all know that actions speak louder than words. And the future and time is going to tell if they are going to make real changes within the department to prevent these types of occurrences. The time will tell, are they going to hold officers within their own department accountable to send a message to other officers that if you don't comply with policies and procedures, and if you deviate from norms, that there will be consequences. But if there are no consequences to the officer, what kinds of messages do that send to other officers within the department? That these things will be brushed under the rug? That they'll be looked over? So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that the chief will institute policies and practices and regulations and training and discipline within his department to make sure that these types of things don't happen again. I'm sure he doesn't like seeing these things happen just as much as we don't. But we're here because we want justice for Tatiana. We're here because we are carrying her banner into battle. And we are going to fight this all the way through to make sure that there is some accountability for what happened. Again, my name is Neil Gelawat. I'm one of the lawyers here at Shane Cohn Stiles who will be representing Tatiana in this case. And I'll introduce my colleague Tom Seabaugh, who has worked with me on some other civil rights cases here, and invite him to make any comments he'd like to.
Switch.
You can start.
Okay. So my name is Thomas Seabaugh.
I'm sorry, can we move the microphones down a little?
Sure. Okay.
So everyone can, thank you.
Okay. So my name is Thomas Seabaugh. I'm a civil rights attorney in Los Angeles, and I've recently joined the team of attorneys who will be working on this case. When we see an egregious injustice like this, it should cause us to reflect on the wider problem of police brutality. Tatiana is not the first victim of police brutality in Bakersfield. And her encounter with the BPD shows how far things have now progressed. A young woman is on her bicycle shopping for a Father's Day gift. She's not doing anything wrong. She's completely innocent. She's stopped at gunpoint, and by the end of the encounter, she's being beaten and her flesh is being torn by an attack dog. And to top it all off, the police have the audacity afterwards to try to have her prosecuted. At the end of the encounter, it's not the police officers who did this who have to worry about criminal prosecution, but the victim. Now, one lawsuit, of course, cannot solve all the world's problems or all of Bakersfield's problems. But we can start by holding accountable the people who did this to her. Tatiana has basic democratic and constitutional rights, and there should be consequences for those who are responsible. And we intend in the process to shed some light on the more systemic problems that have contributed to this injustice.
Okay, and I should have said this earlier. Obviously, Tatiana is to my right, and her parents, Alicia and Craig, are to Tom's left, and many of you know Patrick Jackson with the NAACP local chapter, who's here as well. Patrick was responsible largely for putting together the video that has now garnered almost 8 million views about Tatiana's story. So with that, I will take any questions that you folks may have.
Now, is this claim for everybody, the claim against, is that for everybody as part of this claim against it, or is it individually?
You mean the officers?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the purpose of a claim is to notify the municipality that we intend to file a lawsuit. And so what we've identified in the claim are the names of the officers who were involved in the altercation. This will all be one lawsuit against all of the officers who are involved. We know Officer Moore, Officer Vasquez were involved, but we have reason to believe that other officers were also present during the time. And once we ascertain the names of those officers who were also present, we'll make a decision at a later point about whether or not they have to be included in the lawsuit.
And then what do you hope to gain by doing a claim first as opposed to just filing a lawsuit right away?
There's really nothing to gain. It's just required by law. So the law says in California that if you are going to file a lawsuit against a public entity, the government code requires us to file a claim first to notify them that we intend to file a lawsuit. So this is just a procedural first step.
You said several times, and even when Eyewitness News we interviewed you, Tatiana, you talked about how there's a wider problem in the police department. What is that problem, and do you have actually tangible results you hope to see at the end of this?
Well, what we know is that the Guardian newspaper came in some time ago and did a empirical study where they determined that the Bakersfield Police Department was the deadliest police force in the country. But do we have concrete examples of other instances where police officers from the police department used excessive force? Yes. We know about the Xavier Hines and Timothy Grismore incident. My firm is involved in other cases involving allegations of excessive force against police officers. And those allegations will be included in the complaint and will be part of the lawsuit in this case. We're not just talking about Tatiana's case. We're also talking about what we believe to be a pattern of excessive force that's being used by police officers within that department against ordinary citizens.
Could Tatiana talk a little bit
Sure.
about how this whole incident has impacted her emotionally and any
Absolutely.
physical issues she still has?
Absolutely. Go ahead and tell them how it's affected you emotionally, physical issues.
Yeah.
And we'll move the mics over to
Thank you
you.
very much.
Never had this many mics in front of you.
Never.
Is it yours?
Yep.
Have you could attempt to spread them in a...
Yes, I will.
I apologize for being late. We get
23, please.
Yeah.
Just a little closer.
oh, no problem.
Can you leave the Eyewitness News as well?
Can't see your face with your mic.
Sort of a... I can get them so close, but I don't know how much you can see, so this is the best that we can do.
On your cover there, we got a science that we got.
Okay.
If you slide that one over. We have producers that'll get mad at us. This down.
Is that going to be okay?
Okay. Are we good for her to tell you guys how she's suffering? All right.
Well,
You go that way, I'll do it.
Hang on.
I'll go through there. She's in the way. You shoot it. I'm out of the way.
okay, we're ready.
Good to go? Okay.
All right, well, what happened to me is it was just vicious. It changed me very bad. My friends tell me I'm different. I can't talk about the story without crying. I hope and I pray this doesn't happen to anybody else. But it's for the best.
Tell me how you're doing physically.
physically. I'm still in pain every day. I'm very more on my P's and Q's. I'm very paranoid. I don't allow my parents to leave the garage open. Doors have to be locked. Windows have to be closed. You know, when you grow up and officers come to your school and tell you you can count on us, you can count on us, and then they turn around and they just violate you and your rights. It's just the worst thing ever. It's like being raped. But I'm not broken, and I can come back. I'm strong. My mom raised me to be strong. My dad raised me to be wise. I got this, but everybody, please protect your kids. Protect yourselves. It's dangerous.
Okay, any other questions?
I'm curious, do you guys, is the goal in here, obviously with the lawsuit, there's money involved, is the goal to have the officers punished, or what's really the goal in having this claim being filed?
So we don't have the ability to punish the officers. The only entity that has the ability to prosecute the officers is the district attorney's office or the federal equivalent, which would be the U.S. Attorney's Office. Our job is to hold the officers accountable for what happened. And all the law allows us to do is to seek money damages for all of the suffering and injuries that Tatiana has sustained. But our hope is that by going through this process and by potentially having this case be heard by a jury, that they will send a loud and clear message to the officers in the department that what happened is not appropriate and it should not happen again.
What do you think the chances of that are, given the district attorney's office seems like they've already spoken on this matter?
I think that there's virtually a 0% chance that the district attorney's office is going to prosecute any of the officers in connection with this incident.
And
the only person that they were ever contemplating prosecuting is sitting right in front of you. And that's the sad thing about this case.
And you think this claim will turn that around?
I don't think it's going to cause them to prosecute the officers, but someone has to stand up for Tatiana and say, we're not going to tolerate this. There has to be some accountability.
Can we discuss what is...
Tatiana, how do you think they should be punished?
What's that accountability going to look like?
Prosecution.
So you don't think that's going to happen?
It's not going to happen. I mean, you guys can ask the district attorney's office if they're thinking about it, but I'm pretty sure that they made it clear that the only person they were considering for prosecution was Tatiana.
So then that begs the question, is this just to prove a point, or what's the point, I guess, of this claim?
The point of this claim is to make sure that there is some accountability. Because there's not going to be any prosecution of any of the officers, then this is our only opportunity to hold these officers accountable, to ask them questions under oath about what they did and why they did to her, and also to provide Tatiana with compensation for what she's been through. The emotional scarring, the physical injuries, these are things that are going to bother her and cause her trouble for a long, long time.
And what grounds do you plan to litigate this on, and what violations do you feel that the police department overstepped their bounds?
Well, we think they used excessive force. We think the claims will be both under state law and federal law. We think that there was a violation of her Fourth Amendment rights and also her rights under state law.
And what is there a dollar amount that you could tell us? What are the damages monetarily?
There is no dollar amount. At the end of the day, a jury, if this case goes to trial, will have to decide what is a fair and reasonable number to award her for everything that she's gone through. And that will be a combination of her medical bills, her lost wages, and her pain and suffering and mental and emotional distress. All of the things that have caused her pain and trouble, and that will continue to cause her pain and trouble for the rest of her life. Those are all things that a jury will take into account.
Is this litigation on a contingency basis, sir?
Yes, all of our cases are that way.
Now, District Attorney, I think earlier this month when she decided to drop the charges against Tatiana, that she didn't believe that she could find, or she could convince 12 jurors that Tatiana did something wrong. How confident are you that you guys can convince a jury of 12 people that those officers acted and used excessive force?
We're very confident. I think the facts speak for themselves. I think the national media attention that this case has gotten is evidence of that. You have a young girl who did nothing wrong, who minutes later is on the ground being attacked by a canine with knees in her back and taken into custody. And under those circumstances, it's just so wrong what happened. We feel very confident in the case.
Have you, I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit, but put yourself also in the officer's shoes, saw what they were given, they were dealt with. Is there any justification to the way they acted in your mind?
No, I don't think so. I think that, and part of that is echoed by the chief, that the officers probably didn't do the right thing when they put the canine on her. But they had information about a black male, white T-shirt, pink backpack. She's not male. She doesn't have a pink backpack. If they had a question about whether she was a male or female, they could have done more to ascertain that information before they started to use excessive force. For example, by asking her her name and talking to her, as opposed to resorting to force and getting her on the ground and punching her in the face and putting a canine on her. Any other questions?
Who all here today is representing this young lady?
It's myself, Neil Gelawat, with Chain Cone Styles, and Thomas Seabaugh, who's with the law office of Thomas Seabaugh.
You had said that you guys are going to continue with this through the end until you feel like justice is given. What are the next steps? What's this going to look like as it plays out?
Yeah, so the next step is when we file a claim, the city has 45 days to respond. They can accept or reject the claim, and we expect them to reject the claim. That's typical protocol in these cases. Once the claim is rejected, we have 6 months from the date of rejection to file a lawsuit, and once the lawsuit's been filed, we'll eventually get a trial date, and we'll work up the case between that time and the trial. If the case is able to be resolved by way of a settlement, that will happen before trial. And if not, and the case doesn't settle, then the case will go to trial.
So you say a settlement. Would that not hold the officers accountable like you say you want?
Yeah, I think the trouble that you're having is that when I say accountability and prosecution are, prosecution is a form of accountability, but we don't have that available to us. Okay, so no settlement is going to result in the officers being prosecuted on our end. A settlement would be for a monetary sum of money that is designed to compensate Tatiana. Now, one thing or things that could be negotiated as part of the settlement would be assurances from the department that they're going to change their practices or trainings or whatever it may be. And that is all stuff that's to be negotiated at some later point. But that's what we mean by a settlement.
Do you have examples of what you'd like to see the law enforcement do if you are able to negotiate them taking action and changing their ways that you guys believe are wrong?
Well, we would like to see better training. We would like to see officers being trained about how to deal with situations like this where force is not the first option. We'd like to see officers using more compassion initially when talking to people. And we also want there to be accountability from within the department. You'll remember that right after this incident occurred, before the chief intervened and said that there would be an internal investigation, someone else from the department said there won't be an investigation and all of the officers were within policy. Well, that sends the wrong message to everyone else in the department. It says that you can do the things that the officers did in this case and there will be no consequences. And that's a problem. So I think there has to be an element of discipline from within the agency. Okay?
Had papers been filed yet, sir?
Yes, the claim was filed this morning.
And time and element until we get before a judge?
We would at least probably 2 months, 3 months before we have a lawsuit filed and all the parties are in the case. Okay, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
Trying to get out of here, guys, this morning.
Oh, yes, no, thank you.
Excuse my elbow case, and I apologize for that.
You were awesome today.
Are these handouts?
These are the claims, yes.